Okay, seats. Mic check. Mic check. Mic check. Okay, so we are now transitioning into the later part of the evening. You're welcome to stand, but we also have a particular arrangement. The way that we designed this conversation is to be intimate, to actually have like a feedback, a back and forth. So if you could actually be a part of the circle in some way, that would be great. Take a seat, arrange yourself closer. Um, yes. Okay. Yes. Okay. Yes. 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 Be a part of the circle. Let the circle be unbroken. Yes. Okay. 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 Beautiful. Okay. So we are here having our second installation of the Artropolis. Um, Good. You see, I don't like microphones. I like having conversations here, like to have something in my mouth. I'm like, okay. So, yes, we are here at the second edition of Artropolis. This has been a three-part series, and this is really a crowning moment for me. I feel like this was really, yeah, this has been 7 months in the working. I am one of five, like as far as the guild is concerned. I'm Rio. I'm Rio. Hi. Hello, everyone. We have Tahid, also part of the Artropolis. Everyone say hi. Okay, cool. We have Quay in the back, part of the guild. Okay. We have Awa. And lastly, where's Philly? Philly! Okay, yes. So we are a five-part team, all-star team, also in tandem with the Walker team, who's also been incredible. Like, shout out to specifically Sophia, Sierra, and Megan, also, who have been part of this like installation, truly. Um, and so we have really been thinking a lot about what Atropolis looks like as far as placing ourselves as artists, as people who have stake in the future, and what does it look like to have a conversation like in intentional relationships together, right? So the circle being one of those things where it's like everyone's voice matters here today. Like we actually have like a back and forth we have designed into the conversation. And yes, we have a beautiful team, a panel that I'm going to introduce here as well. But before I do that, I just wanted to give a brief intro of the Walker. Um, the land that we stand on today um, is located on the contemporary, traditional, and ancestral homelands of the Dakota people. This site, which was once marshlands and meadows, holding meaning for both Dakota, Ojibwe, and indigenous people, from other native nations who still live in our community today. Um, this is important to acknowledge, right? We have to place ourselves in the conversation. Um, and yes, like I think reckoning with these tensions is also a part of this conversation that I'm actually excited to talk and really get into. Following the talk, the chairs will also be rearranged in a particular way. Please feel free to actually like mingle. We'll have Effie who will continue like with musics and sounds. Yeah, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the evening. Okay, cool. Okay, so please, okay, bear with me, yeah? Brian Lozenski is a professor I had and had the pleasure of being a student of at McAllister College. He is also the chair of the educational department, and he received his PhD from the University of Minnesota, where he studied the social and cultural context of teaching and learning. His research explores the intersections of critical participatory action research, Black intellectual traditions in education, urban education, and ethnic studies policy in practice. Like Brian is in the Ivy Towers, but also like really like doing work in the ground. You feel me? Like theory and practice. This is where we meet Brian. Um, Beautiful. So Brian has taught in Philadelphia, in St. Paul. Um, yeah, and he just is really dope individual. Please welcome. Please welcome. Okay. Okay, next panel. We have Keith Baker here, who I had the pleasure of being introduced to through Dr. Remy. I'm part of Dr. Remy's Drone Academy, slight plug, but it's a really great connection, the way that we have been able to connect, because the way that Remy explained Keith Baker to me was someone who was in the urban planning scene and is intentional about bringing in Black, brown, ethnic communities and like positioning them in economic power, right? Like employing them and actually like involving them in the process. And so that's my personal connection that I have to Keith Baker. Beyond that, he's an executive director for the ReConnect Rondo, an umbrella advocacy organization committed to addressing racial disparities in Minnesota. Keith is leading the organization mission to revitalize the Rondo community. This is dope, guys. Okay, yeah? It's a land bridge that reconnects Rondo and creates Minnesota's first African American cultural enterprise district. Yeah, like reconciling like histories of gentrification, of blowing down communities, and actually being intentional and being like, how can we reconnect those stories? How can we reconnect people again? So that is the background that we have, Keith. And so please welcome in this experience as well. Za'Nia Coleman is our beautiful moderator today, having these conversations. When I tell you the way her brain works and the way she's able to like weave together words to ask questions that really are piercing, it's something else, truly. And so I'm really grateful, and we have the pleasure of actually being, yeah, it's just showers. But Za'Nia is an interdisciplinary artist experimenting with textiles, moving images, cultural curation. Her primary medium is film, focusing on documentary, oral history, and digital projections. The goal is to experiment with how to visualize the intersections of the archive, black folklore, and Black science fiction. Za'Nia holds a bachelor's in film studies and film theory and culture. Her community held positions are the engagement manager for the fields at Root Springs in Andalou, Minnesota, media education specialist at Spin, St. Paul. She's been in the community, guys, okay? Like the accolades continue on, like, but she's really someone who I think is just a grounded person to have in this conversation about how to connect and really hold together this conversation. So please welcome Za'Nia as well. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And without further ado, I will pass it off to you, madame. Okay.
Beautiful, beautiful. Those were amazing intros. That was amazing intros. Yeah, so I'm really excited to be here with you all. I feel like towards the end, we're gonna have some time for Q&A, but also possibly some space for the panelists to ask questions of the audience as well. And I would love to start us off with some text. I feel like whenever I'm asked to moderator speak, I love to like reference things from like either inspiration that the organizers gave me. And so one of the conversations we were having was about water and like the power of water and its ability to do many things. One, adapt, help things flourish, destroy things, replenish things. So kind of just like the dichotomy of both. And I think I'm hoping in this conversation we can hold space for like both ands and not like either ors. So I'm hoping that's where we can go with it. And so for reference, I immediately thought of A Nation Takes Place. And it's a Navigating Race and Water in Contemporary Art. It's by Tia Simone Gardner and Shannon M. Griffin. And so there's a couple of pieces that I just wanted to start with that I think reflect the both and. And so at one point, Tia references a Saidiya Hartman quote where she says, "How can narrative embody life in words and at the same time respect what we cannot know?" And then it goes on, especially as my work in the archive, where it's like, as we're reinventing and repositioning ourselves and creating our own history and spotlighting where we've been and where we come. And I think individually their practices reflect that. Like, how do we interject our narratives and the things that we find important? And if I say anything wrong, don't quote me. Okay, so so it says, in the last moments of organizing the work presented here, I realized that Black aesthetics do not perhaps have to be metabolized into the traditions of a marine art history. We can speak nearby, enact a different speaking. In other words, a speaking that does not objectify, does not point to an object as if it is distant from the speaking subject or absent from the speaking place. A speaking that reflects on itself and can come very close to a subject without ever having to seize it or claim it. A speaking in brief, whose closure are only moments of transition opening up to other moments of possible transition. These are forms of indirectness well understood by anyone in tune with poetic language. So that was just something that kind of spoke to, I think these type of conversations aren't like open-ended. I mean aren't like hard-ended. They kind of like open up to other possibilities, and we're hoping that you all can see yourselves in the worlds that are trying to be created around us, and even like the worlds of your own and close by. So yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to start with. And then we're gonna go ahead and jump into our questions. So just to kind of ground us with where we are, I would love to know how both of you came to Minneapolis. And also practice wise, what are you doing now and kind of how you got to how we're starting?
Well, I'm so pleased to be here and to really reflect on the question, because I've been in the Twin Cities about 45 years. Came here when I was about 20 years old from Duluth, Minnesota, by way of Japan. Um, so I've been in youth development work for many, many years, led undoing racism work within the United Way system for many, many years, particularly back when I was about 25, probably in the 80s, mid 80s. Um, really began to look at how education happens, youth development happens. Was a musician though before that. I was a part of the 80s music scene, you know. I don't see anybody in the audience really old enough to know what I'm talking about. um, so music was a really important part of my growing up in Duluth. My mother was a phenomenal um, person in politics in Minnesota. So that's part of the levers that I learned about the workings of. Um, so spent about 18 years with the Department of Transportation, managing a whole host of projects and people, just learning how various things function. So just been in a lot of arenas in private sector as well. So that's a little bit of what brings me to the project that I now lead in the Rondo community.
Yeah, thank you. And again, thanks to everybody and Rio and Tahid and the organizers. This is probably the most scenic space I've ever been on a panel on. So thank you for that. But yeah, I've been here now for about going over 20 years. I grew up in Philadelphia, and I was a math teacher in Philadelphia, but also a musician. I was a hip hop artist. So the decade later, 90s, like early 2000s, lifetime ago. Don't look up anything. Um, but yeah, I mean, my arrival here was completely arbitrary. I married somebody who was from here, and we decided we were gonna, relocate here for a couple years, and then probably head back to the East Coast. And that couple years turned into 10, 20 years. Um, and there is something incredibly unique and special about the Twin Cities. And we were just talking. I said, you talk to anybody long enough, and you're gonna be like, oh, okay, we have, dot 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 people in common, which I think provides from an organizing standpoint, because I'm an educator. I'm also an organizer. From an organizing standpoint, is gold, right? As soon as you can begin to connect those dots, because organizing is just about I mean, a large part of it is about understanding what our networks are in order to build capacity and to build power. And so power comes from our ability to have those connections. And the more connections we can have, the more capacity and power we can build. And so to be in a space where you can say, okay, I know, we could talk for 5 minutes and be like, okay, we've got 7, 8 people in common. And now we can have those threads, and now we can do the things that we're going to do starting tomorrow, I guess. Right. Like, so. Yeah, thank you.
Beautiful. Um, and I hope that was a soft enough question before we start the first one.
It's a good start.
I would love for you both to possibly share an example of world building that inspired you either growing up or inspires you now. And this can be a reference to a form of community engagement, a piece of public art, community groups, kind of those bigger pieces that we remember either seeing ourselves in or seeing how we would like our community to look.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I saw this question, and I taught a course. I'm a professor at McAllister College, and I taught a course this last year called World Making, and I'm in the Educational Studies department. And for me, that's at the core of what education should be about, is to innate and to help us expand our thinking and have that kind of imagination to be able to envision something that does not yet exist, right? And so when we talk about world building, just like from like more of like a theoretical philosophical level, like we are using our history, our experiences, and all of the little bits of information that we're developing, accumulating over our life experiences to be able to do something. Now, whether we're trying to do something different or whether we're trying to replicate something, I think is a core question in education, right? And so for me, world building comes back to, and it's not, and when I talk about education, I'm not talking about school. Actually, mostly not talking about school. I'm actually talking about the I'm talking about the experiences combined with the knowledges that we're able to develop in formal, non-formal, informal spaces, family context, cultural context, community context, interacting with the natural world. And so for me, world building is any time people come together intentionally, not always even intentionally. I think sometimes, you get like dope people in the room together and world building just starts to happen. But I think about some of the folks who are here tonight and some of the folks who I organize with in organizations like Education for Liberation Minnesota. We formed out of a convening in 2019 called the Free Minds, Free People Conference. And that conference was about trying to reimagine alternative forms of education, trying and not reimagine and then enact them, right? And so what does it mean? We can imagine all day, but then the hard part then becomes like, what do you have to do to enact? And that requires, structure, power, that requires resources, that requires, and then, the kinds of resources that our communities typically don't have at our disposal, right? So we have to think about what are the resources that we have? What are those capacities that we have, particularly they're around our abilities to support each other and the strategy of our networks. And so for me, a conference like the Free Minds, Free People conference, where we had 1,500 people from across the country come here, specifically looking at what was the educational landscape of the Twin Cities and beyond, to then go to other areas in the country and say, okay, what are the similarities and differences? How do we continue to build our own capacity and be able to learn from what was happening here, to be able to then enact something in a different kind of context. So for me, that was about world building. And so anytime we're able to develop those kinds of spaces, and I believe like these kinds of spaces are about world building. And so, yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah, beautiful. Don't stop, bro. Don't stop. When I first read the question, I just thought, wow, this is just a huge question. And has so many layers to it. I have to go back to just growing up in Duluth, Minnesota, just as a starting place, right? A lot of folks don't know that there are some black people up in Duluth. But we have to reflect back on back in '68 is when our family moved there. I have 3 other brothers, and immediately upon our arrival, the basketball coach from up at the high school had his children introduced to us, and all of a sudden we had his daughter as a babysitter. Don't know really what's going on during that particular period of time, because I'm coming from Japan. Dr. King is assassinated, but that's the placement, right? oh, I've got 4 new black basketball players. You just got to really kind of hear. But it's important, an experience starting there, because I do recall my parents creating this sense of place for us, right? And it's that sense of place that was really important as a young person. And then as I kind of project myself forward, I come to the Twin Cities, and I'm a youth worker before youth work was a profession, right? And so as a youth worker, I'm asking the question, we're doing all of this work. I can see I'm trying to draw people out of the river, if you will. Who's pushing and what's pushing them in? So I got hooked up at the University of Minnesota with Jim Kielsmeyer, who really was one of the founders of the National Youth Leadership Council, which is the service learning movement, really based on some Peace Corps principles globally. So as a young 23, 24-year-old, I'm inspired by this work, really, really excited by the opportunity of creating programming and experiences for young people that allow them to see themselves differently. And as a result, I began to see myself differently, right? So it was that start of programming. And when I think about what I do today, it really is about asking the question, who's still shoving folks in that we're all having to fish out, right? And so the work that we do at ReConnect Rondo is really try to take a look at how systems function and embed. And I'm as critical of our nonprofit ecosystem as I am our for-profit ecosystem and our philanthropic ecosystem and our government ecosystem. 40 years in the Twin Cities, I've seen no scalable change for African Americans, none, right? But I'm still inspired, right? There's still possibility because I can reach back in the 80s and listen to the work that's being done here, be a part of space like this that really clearly tells me we are doing some wonderful things that are very inspiring. And so I always have to reflect back on my learning growing up in Duluth and then ultimately my youth development work and being inspired by young people finding their place to contribute.
Thank you for those. And yeah, I think speaking about both of y'all's work and kind of even thinking about the spaces that are used to reimagine, what ways do you think your work interrupts or reimagines places of destruction or community displacement? Like, what are some of those things that you're currently doing to either counteract that or speak to that?
I know you're also not gonna not answer that question about world building.
Okay.
Too important. Too important to hear that voice.
Okay, so for world building, I would say for me, I consider myself like a Minneapolis community art baby. I grew up, my auntie is Thomasina Petrus, and so I grew up like adjacent to the theater scene. And so just around a lot of people who like, I think growing up around artists is already inspiring because they're attempting to like live a life outside of like your regular 9 to 5 and really just like every month, month to month, gig to gig, trying to like find what they're going to do to support themselves. It also feeds them. I think the after parties are some of the best after parties after a play or after something is done. And then also, my mom intentionally was always looking for community where her kids could see reflections of themselves. And so I think I also grew up in a Pan-African community called a Kefren that was in the Twin Cities. I think that started in the 90s. I don't know all the facts. I was kind of born into it versus like learned about it and had to join. But I grew up with lots of like aunties and uncles and people that I now call sisters and brothers. But it was an interesting perspective and experience to see people actively trying to like mark and carve out cultural space for themselves that wasn't necessarily seen day to day walking around Minneapolis. So yeah, I feel like those would be like my first intros to road building that I've definitely shaped, like how I hold community space, the type of environments I want to create, the intention I want to have for certain things. So yeah. Boom.
Well, one of the things that as I'm listening to you talk about the Kefren Society and so on. So when we were working, Kamal Kambui, who was a youth development cat, created the Underground Railroad, an experience of the Underground Railroad. And so as I'm listening to the conversation about the 90s in particular, you know, I'm just in, it was so important for his work because a lot of young people, while intellectually knew about the Underground Railroad, hadn't experienced it. So absent kind of this badge of honor, if you will. But I appreciate so much you mentioning that period of time, because if you can imagine Minnesota, the Twin Cities during that period of time and youth development work, there just wasn't a lot of cultural context in programming. There was activities that we were all involved in, but there wasn't a lot of conversations about cultural context and expression and learning. So I just want to say I appreciate you mentioning that. So just thinking about the work, I'll just describe a little bit. The Rondo community was a thriving, emerging middle class, 120 years of a social, cultural, economic, civic, spiritual fabric being built. And this is representative of about 950 communities across the country. The freeway comes through. In fact, Minnesota was one of the first funded federal highway projects. And so Rondo was one of the first destroyed by the freeway system. So now the disbursement of a community, the working order of a community, the social, cultural, economic, civic, spiritual fabric, dismantle. So what to do in this moment of time of unprecedented investment in transportation? And what I spoke about a little bit earlier was it's almost counterintuitive to say, how do you use this tool that created such harm as a tool that can create great benefit, right? And so that's really what this project is about, is to create this African American Cultural Enterprise District. And we didn't call it that, or Rondo wasn't called that. It was just a community called Rondo, right? It was the only place that Black people actually could live and commune. But to create 21 acres of brand new land over a highway, you've got to understand how public sector works, how all of these levers work in order to create the impact that you're really aspiring. But we always imagine 21st century, not while we want to right past wrongs, we want to celebrate today, we want to set conditions for the future ultimately. And so by creating 21 acres of new land, or at least a structure that can hold 21 acres, then the question is what to do with that newly created land, not only from an ownership standpoint, but from an expression standpoint, right? From an activity standpoint and so on. And so that's really the project that I am fortunate enough to lead, but also something that we think can have some extraordinary benefits in perpetuity.
Yeah, and I think there is an automatic education question, you know, embedded in this question around reimagining spaces of destruction or displacement. You know, my current work is in ethnic studies, policy and practice. You know, most of the rest of the country has been moving toward eliminating Black, Indigenous, Asian, Latinx, you know, curricula from schools, pre-K through PhD, and here in Minnesota, through the work of the Ethnic Studies Coalition, we've actually been able to expand those kinds of offerings, imperfectly, admittedly imperfectly, because we've got so many years of bad faith disinvestments in educational context, and so there's a lot of work to be done. But this question, literally, to me, is an ethnic studies question. It's a Black studies question, right? How do you reimagine interrupting, or how do you reimagine context of destruction or community displacement, right? How many generations of African Americans have had to answer that question? And so what if that became a central question that young people had to grapple with in their educational journeys, right? From day one, right? And so it first, it does two things, right? It causes you to, one, have to build the skill set to do the imagining, which actually we kind of work backwards in education a lot of times. Young people are very imaginative, and by the time they graduate, we like try to beat that out of them, right? And so it would have to like work on like holding on to that skill set. How do you be resilient in the face of people trying to, you know, beat that imaginative capacity out of you, right? And then secondly, understanding what destruction and displacement actually looks like, and knowing that we're not the first group of people that have had to grapple with this question. So what if that became a core? And then you have a project like ReConnect Rondo, right? Or you've got a project, I mean, we could, any neighborhood, right? Any neighborhood that we're in, right? Where we can say, what do we want to imagine here, and how do we, and what education provides us the capacity to actually do that thing, right? And so I think the existence of the work of something like ReConnect Rondo puts a mandate on educational institutions, right? Again, pre-K through PhD, to be able to say, okay, there's a mandate here from this literal project that we have to be now accountable to, right? Are we turning out? Are we engaging? Are we engaging young people in these questions to be able to recreate this entire space, right? Or are we pretending, right, that these demands don't exist, right? Are we pretending the status quo is okay? Are we blaming them when they resist, right? When they try to destroy something that's fundamentally, right, taking their freedom to be an artist away, right? Where they have to work to be an artist despite, right, the systems that surround them. And so, you know, when we start to think, and again, the reason I love the ReConnect Rondo project is because it's so interdisciplinary. And we talked about this before, right? It's not just about architecture. It's not just about economics. It's not just about transportation. It's not just about the arts. It's not just about history, right? It's about all of those things combined, working together. And an education system that is absent that integration is it's a fraud, or it is devoid of any actual value, right? And so as part of our work is to like demand to say, like, we want our children to be able to participate in this project, and this school better damn well prepare us and them to be able to engage in that. And what does that look like, right? And so this becomes, I think, the mandate that the community provides to the school. The school has to be accountable to the community vision, not the other way around. And so I think this is a perfect, when we talk about interrupting, right? This is the kind of interruption that we need to say, from folks to come in and say, right, like this is, we need the school to be able to serve our purpose rather than the other way around.
I'm gonna tell you, I'm gonna take your brother on the road. You know that, don't you? I mean, seriously. When you think about the way a transportation department functions, when you think about the way a city functions, a county functions, a planning organization like Met Council functions, we don't experience what's come about until after it's already planned and done. So we're constantly in a reactive place. The strategy always is to get ahead, and only those that are in transportation or in that institution know when that money is going to rain. And so how you organize a community to respond to it, looking at all of the levels of impacts on a community, right? And you try to ask the question or answer the question, how do you restore a community so devastated? How do you do it? And how do you do it in a systems way? Now, we're all doing systems work, but how do you deal with it understanding the way the systems function? And how do you look at health? How do you look at education? How do you look at economics? How do you look at just arts expression, arts creative, right? We can figure that out because of the lived experience of the folks around us. We can figure that part out. But it's about the creation of something and the influence on the levers and planning ahead of the actual product that's been planned for, right? And it really is fundamentally important for us to do. And I just so appreciate the importance of tying young people. This is an educational bastion, right? It really is. But we've got to be so intentional in getting out of our silo thinking to get into more of a integrated, interconnected approach to the work being done.
Yeah, and when you talk about kind of building out that systematic re-engagement or leveraging the systematic power, I'm curious with communities like Rondo who have been devastated by institutions and these systems, like what are some of the practices that you guys put in place or ways of engaging people to not only rebuild trust, but like re-engage in the fact that this type of institution or these type of levers or these tools can actually be used to their benefit?
I'll say how this project came about, or the idea of this came about. It was the Central Light Rail corridor along University Avenue. No stops planned in Rondo. Now, 120 years of Rondo living, but no stops in Rondo. So it was the community that said, no, that doesn't work, almost to the point of suing the federal government in 2011. But the idea of replacing the land began to really codify about that time from the elders and those that were pushing back on that council. So I think telling that portion of it is important in order for you to really understand we are a community-driven project because the elders that were part of that sat on the board of the organization and helped form the board. So we don't see ourselves separate from community. We see ourselves as a segment and a portion of community voice, right? So now with that, we can move forward with the level of authenticity, of truth telling, right? Of really ensuring that this is legacy led, right, in all aspects. Now it's not easy. Again, this is a lot of pain, right? And so the first thing for us is we have to allow people to enter in their voice at any point in this process. Some folks have been with us for 5 years. Some folks are just entering in today. So how do you bring people along? We're not going to all see things the same, but we have to always have entry points, right, for voice to kind of influence what's happening across the board. The other thing that I think from an urban planning standpoint, we've not said that this building is going to go there, this building is going to go there, this amphitheater is going to go there. You'll see drawings just to give people depictions of ideas. But we've not established anything but aspirations, asking the question, what was Rondo like before the freeway came through? It was a close-knit, people knew one another and so on. What do you visualize Rondo to be like? All centered on aspirations, not a building, right? This is where the arts are so important here, because it's through the arts that we began to imagine what the built environment looks like, right? Through the arts, we began to know what the smell, taste, feel of the environment is, right? That's when we began to look at the built environment with community. But we don't do it right now, because what we want is communities to be clear about what their aspirations are and what it is that it feels like to them to express the history of Rondo, but I'd say the history of Black people, period.
Beautiful, thank you. Also, before I move on to a question for you, anybody who wants to come and sit down, please feel free to come and join the circle. You won't be interrupting, I promise. So, yeah, if you want to get off the stairs. Brian, with your work, I think I got to read. Oh, perfect. I got to read one of your writings, and I think I loved hearing about how you're working to reframe how we think about some things and some of the areas of, I think, I don't know, distress with educating Black youth. But one of the quotes I remember was, "We don't need an we don't have an achievement gap. We have an education debt." And also thinking about moving some of our intentions and goals in educational spaces from outcomes to vision. So I guess I'm really curious, like, how has the concept of education debt shifted or shaped your approach to working within education systems? And what does it mean to teach or organize from that framework in a world still obsessed with closing gaps, whether it be wealth gaps or whatever that is?
Yeah. And that so the concept of education debt actually comes from an educational scholar named Gloria Ladson Billings, who's a longtime professor at the University of Wisconsin. Um, but she argues basically that, for instance, the focus on a gap is very much ahistorical, right? It's very much about looking to say, okay, you know, whatever gap, whatever community, this community has this community has this community achieves at this level, this community achieves at this level, whatever. Right? We can look at all the things, right? Healthcare, economics, education, right? We can go through the gamut uh, of gaps, right? And that's typically how we frame things. And so the education debt is really just a demand to be historical, right? And it's a demand to understand how a gap emerges, right? And how a gap is like systemically structured in, right? And so she would talk about things like there's an economic gap, there's a moral gap, right? Things that, and so when we start to frame the education of young people through the lens of gaps, to be able to frame it through the lens also of reparations, right? To say like this is not about closing a gap, this is about repairing harm, right? Then and the kind of bad faith efforts of education I've been talking about, right, in this conversation. And if that is centered, right? If that becomes the grounding question of like, can we understand the harms? Can we understand the forms of damage that have been right, that have created this gap? And then also, I mean, for me, it's like, are the metrics of the gap even the metrics we should be looking at, right? And I really could care less about a standardized test. I really could care less about, right, any of that kind of nonsense, right? We know that, I mean, we know that they're just proxies for like zip codes and, parental income and all that kind of stuff, right? So, but the problem is like, can you get people into that conversation, right? When you go in and you start to talk to, and so this gets back to then these institutions, this question about what do we do with these institutions, right? So obviously, yes, there are people, like plenty of people I see in this space who I know who are involved in the institution, right? And what is our job in the institution, right? Who are we beholden to? As becomes a question, right? Who are you beholden to in a particular kind of institution? And so, when we're talking about being community engaged, being community connected, you should be beholden to the community first and foremost above anything else, right? Institution be damned. And if the institution doesn't want to come along with you, then you actually should be antagonistic, right? Even if you still work there, right? And so part of it then becomes, well, if we're going to operate and I think I've gotten to like the age and maybe like somewhat secure space where I can be very honest with this conversation of this is my goal, right? I teach at McAllister College. You go a mile away from the campus and none of those students can get into the school, right? And so what is my job to be accountable to them, right? And yes, I have wonderful students like Rio and Rose sitting here, right? And others like, and part of my job is to be like asking them those same questions, right? And I think they're really great examples of people that have taken on that challenge, and so I think that becomes part of it. And so the response of the institution to that question determines my stance. So I'm like, okay, are we working together on this, or do I have to be, Robin Hood? Do I have to be a virus in the matrix? Do I have to be whatever the case may be, whatever metaphor you want to use, right? And so I mean, I think we're all faced with that dilemma because also this is our paycheck, right? This is how we put food in our in our families' mouths, right? And so, but that doesn't alleviate us from that responsibility, because this is, again, a Black Studies question, right? This is not new for us to be able to think about institutions. And when we think about them, like, and it always strikes me, right? Like, Black folks did not fight in the Civil War to save the Union, right? We fought in the Civil War to get free. And so that becomes like, well, what's your calculus, right? If we're in this space, that's why we get engaged in these questions. I'm always asking the question, okay, how does my community get free, right? So if someone comes to me, well, what do you think about AI? How does that help my community get free, right? Well, what do you think about community-based co-ops? How does that help my community get free? Right? What do you think about ReConnect Rondo? How does that help my community get free? Right? Like, that becomes like an automatic response to, and it sometimes it does put you in a hard space.
I appreciate you just kind of opening up the door here, because we talk about two things can be true at the same time. Okay, and it's really important. Well, let me just mention one thing. The freeway coming through was $35 million of generational wealth that did not get passed on, equating to 4,800 four-year college degrees at the University of Minnesota, snapshot in time 1980, when college was affordable. That would have been a four-year education for every Black child in Rondo between age 10, okay, and 21. You got to hear the loss, right? Not the gap, but the debt, real, right? I just really want you to know that that's real numbers. Right. And then you ask the question, what could have been the benefit from that educated body of children within Rondo? And I'd say the state of Minnesota. The state of Minnesota lost, right? And that's the way we need to really be thinking about it. The other thing that I think is important, and again, I grew up in Duluth 4 till I was 8 years old, or Japan 4 till I was 18-year-old, before civil rights, Dr. King. So I'm coming to Minnesota not having the same context or understanding, intellectually maybe, but not really emotionally. But I also think what's important growing up in Duluth is I learned to be multidimensional, right? No matter what place that I'm sitting in, I'll know how to navigate it and move and influence it the way that I need to move and influence it. I don't got to stand up and yell, but I know how the system works, right? And how to position things to the advantage of our community, right? You certainly have to speak out, but you also have to be smart. You have to understand what's the objective, right? And don't let nothing get you from that objective. Be multidimensional as you approach that outcome you're looking for. And that's what's allowed me to navigate and get this project positioned, right? Because many of these folks were my former colleagues. I'm an inside outsider and I'm an outside insider, right? That's the way that I've chosen to use my tools, right? To kind of move this proposition forward.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I think I have one more question, and then we're going to transition to Q&A options in that portion of this piece. But one thing I'm really interested in is, what's an area of understanding or skill you're looking to learn more about to expand or improve how you do your work?
Can you repeat the question? I'm such a heady guy in terms of systems, right? This is always where I'm at. That oftentimes I'll lose the emotional art side of it, right? Because I just want this thing to get to the finish line so I can see how the benefit translates. Okay? With that, though, even though I'd say a former musician, it's always there, but I don't get a chance to express that. So I'm just really excited to bring Tacumba, Setu, Robin Robinson to the table and ask them, how should we be approaching and integrating the emotion, the arts, the community in this project from this point moving forward. We've got the puzzle pieces set. So it's the how to do that is really what I'm excited about, but what probably is a space that I'm less traveled.
Yeah, I mean, I think this question gets at, again, you know, going back to the ethnic studies work, where I always talk about three core skill sets within ethnic studies context is the ability to, and again, this comes from Ladson Billings, same person with the education debt, the ability to deconstruct, construct, and reconstruct, right? So deconstruct, right? Question, poke holes, be skeptical, right? To construct then, right? Because the way I say it's always easier to destroy something than to build something, right? So you have to also be able to build your own thing. What is it, right? What is it that we're trying to create? Can I design a curriculum? Can I design a learning environment, a particular kind of space? And then as soon as I do that, can I reconstruct that, right? So what was wrong with it, right? Do I have the humility and the insight to understand that there's something wrong with whatever it is that I made? And so part of that would then be, well, what am I missing? What, like, thinking about, you know, disability studies, thinking about gender studies, thinking about, you know, folks whose, whether it's their lived experiences, whether it's a systemic structural analysis that I do not have, right? Whether it's about a language I do not speak, right? All of those things are constantly, you know, so for me, when you know, thinking about what are the areas that, I mean, and I think we get into these spaces of like mastery. What does that even mean, right? Like there's you haven't mastered anything, right? Like the more you know about something, you realize that you didn't know anything about it, right? And so it's still something that, you know, for me, yeah. So I mean, it's honestly like anything and everything, and so like I'm actually like really itching to get to hear from people's perspectives in this space, because I think that's, you know, you know, they're gonna touch on things we didn't even think about.
That's what, you know, ask us a question.
Right.
Do either of you have a question you like want to pose to the audience first? Yeah. Okay, but I was like, I heard you. Does the audience have a question they would like to pose? Yeah. You can hand your microphone just like that.
So thank you. I'm struck by so much depth and expertise that y'all have brought in a very short period of time for us. I wanted to ask, kind of in line with the closing point, if there's a challenge in the short term, something in the next month or two that you would push for us to really jump in to follow up on what you've said. I know ReConnect has an event coming up in September. I know Macalester College has a thing coming up in October. What are the things that you would point us to take next steps? And I guess in particular, I'm thinking about, this is the fifth year since George Floyd was killed. And there's a need to do exactly what you're talking about in South Minneapolis and to rebuild and heal. So I'm curious about what you're going to say, one or two things that all of us can kind of point towards and do going forward.
And again, I would just throw that back out, right? I mean, I'm sitting next to people, right? Marika Pfefferkorn just hosted a Data for Public Good conference with people all over the country. I mean, I think the ideas are, I would love to hear just what folks are working on and how you're seeing your own particular work connected to this conversation. So I think that's something that I'm.
Didn't you say what was the question? What needs to happen next? I would like to go to the point of the silos. So we have so many things happening everywhere all at once, and to bridge, reconnect all of those pieces together to even have one place to go to for us to be able to remember, engage, connect, and do those things is what needs to happen. So repair, opportunity, and accessibility.
I think one of the things that comes up for me immediately, I mean, I guess it depends on your framing of urgency, but like how we care for the people around us and like what that responsibility or obligation or love to just like honor the relationships you have, maintain those, check in on the people around you, and just like maybe I think maybe more actively care and build relationships. That has been something that's been really important to me. So that's what I think about.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is most critical is being informed. A lot of us will talk about a lot of stuff, but what do you actually know about what it is you're talking about? Not what you're just simply feeling about it, but what do you know about it, right? And so I think there's a lot of room for us to create space, and there is a lot of space that's created where you can dive much deeper, but you got to commit yourself to diving deep. And you also have got to commit yourselves to being okay that you and I might see it different, and not saying my feelings are hurt because you and I disagree, right? You've caused me harm because we disagree, right? So get yourself in space and get your mind right, okay? Because that is what prevents oftentimes our progress. And Minnesota has such a small density of black people. Small. I think Anthony Taylor and I talked about this the other day. Minnesota boxes above its weight, has historically boxed above its weight. It's gotten some stuff done, even though the data says the last 45 years we've not, The reality is the NAACP got its birth here in St. Paul, right? But you don't know that, right? You don't know that. The Niagara movement. So make sure you know so that when you step in and you got something to say, make sure you're also hearing what's coming your way. Sorry to get preachy, but I think it is so important. Be informed.
Yeah, I'll just really quick respond to that because I am noticing what I'll say is a lack of clarity particularly in our political projects sometimes, right? And then when we have interpersonal disagreements and things, if we're not clear on what the political project is that we're trying to accomplish together, those interpersonal dynamics can supersede what it is that we were trying to do in the first place. And I'm seeing that actually in quite a lot of organizations that I've been connected to where we're not clear on the project, right? Because justice, it's powerful, but it's vague, right? Like, right? It can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And so I think when we're working together, making sure, and it's okay to be like, you know what, we don't agree on this, and we don't need to be working on the project together, right? And we can still be cool or whatever, right?
Let's find something we can work on together.
We can, exactly, right? So I think that's another important piece, and that's the urgency that we're getting at too, is that clarity. And particularly if you're struggling, I know folks, hopefully a lot of us are in organizations, if folks are struggling in those organizations, myself included, to be working toward that political clarity within the organization. So that those interpersonal dynamics don't become the central focus all the time.
Yeah. 1 second. I think we have time for one more question.
Thank you. Y'all familiar with the stylistics, right?
Oh, you wait. Yes, you bet.
What you know about that?
Oh, come on now.
Look,
well, what you know about that?
Look, I can tell you a lot, but look.
Right on.
They got a song called "People Make the World Go Round."
Absolutely.
And I bring that up to say, like, they have a song called "People Make the World Go Round," and I bring that up to say, like, in what ways, as us, like, members of community, how can we support the movements that you guys are working so hard towards?
Yeah, appreciate the question so much. I'll just start. ReConnectRondo.com. Join the movement. Okay. The first thing, like I said, be informed. We've got a couple of things happening. We've got a neighborhood area plan webinar August 6th, so that you can learn the journey of what this could be. So that's one thing I want to invite people to join in and do that. Anti-displacement community investment strategies is on August 13th. Those are two things that you can become a little bit more informed with. Is what do we mean by anti-displacement? What do we mean by community investment? What do we mean by that, and how we structure that out? Our legislators, we're in a very, very odd place federally. That's a nice way of saying it. That's a Duluth way of saying it, you know. But our legislature, you know, after we got our 6.2 million, which is really unheard of for a Black organization to get, they tried to claw it back away from us, right? So we've got to become more aware of what's going on in the political realm and stay informed about when they're using our community again as a prop to further their own political propositions, using us as a prop when they receive the same tools and resources that we're requesting for our own community. So being involved in the political process, being involved at the legislature, being involved just in your communication with the Department of Transportation or the city or the county or Met Council, right? Letting them know what your position is about the work we're doing, I think is important. And then social media, social media, social media. Repost, 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 comment, repost, and so on.
They start that song, Trash Man Didn't Get the Trash Today. Right? And as they talk about a labor dispute, right? At the heart of People Make the World Go Round. It's a great song, good reference. Yeah, you could look up Minnesota Ethnic Studies Coalition. We're in a little bit of a summer hiatus, but we'll be back again. There's a general email, social media way to connect with us. And yeah, we as of 2026, every district in the state of Minnesota has to be offering ethnic studies coursework. And I'm very excited about that, but also very scared of that because we need the people who can actually have a background and do it well. So there's a lot of work to be done in that realm.
Well, beautiful. I know we're at time, so I'd love to give a round of applause for our panelists. Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah. Thank you guys so much for talking with me and taking some time, and I definitely appreciate you guys all around too. And I would love to pass it to.
We are going to be just transitioning shortly. So please enjoy like the after situation that we curated. Yes, so we'll have tunes back in the garden terrace. Please feel free to engage. Like there's a lot on the table, yeah? Like a lot of stake that we have. So like talk with your neighbors, have conversations with each other, and just like flow through the space really, and just like, you know, we'll have like vibes, acoustics, a few different things going on also simultaneously happening. So yeah, just feel free to check out the space as is. Thank you guys. Thank you.
No, I didn't get to.